Welcome back folks, patch 1.7 is out for Stalker 2 called the Expedition, which brings a lot of changes, optimization and fixes to the systems of the game itself, not necessarily focusing on features but rather those fixes, although there are some new things. I think some of the start of some very interesting things happening in this game. First off, when it comes to the big feature, we have the new Master difficulty, which is basically reserved for the most skilled players out there. Keep in mind that Master difficulty is relatively difficult when it comes to the amount of damage you take, the amount of damage you give, and at the same time in general when it comes to just the zone itself. In order to start the Master difficulty, you have to restart the game again from scratch, so there is no way of actually applying that, without a mod, as you're already playing throughout your game. Which is fine considering that the Master difficulty is really that big step up when it comes to just in general of the zone, because I noticed that the Veteran difficulty, at least for me, was relatively easy. I mean, again, it depends on who are you fighting and, some of the enemies, because prior to patch 1.4, I believe, one of the problems is that enemies were too precise and they were always aiming at your head. It doesn't matter what it was, even if there was an obstacle, in front of you, people were just sort of auto-aiming in your head, which wasn't really that enjoyable. But now one of the things which they have added is that the enemies are going to, take proper measurements depending on sort of what weapon they're using. So if they have a sniper rifle, they're not going to be getting close to you. If they have more of a shotgun or an SMG, they will start flanking you to get closer to you. That's one of the things I noticed. Of course, it wasn't really a huge change, but it's still a welcome change to make things a little bit more natural and without, making enemy AI too difficult, or well, not too difficult, but sort of fair in that sense, where you're actively gonna be fighting people and there is going to be some sense behind on how they play and how they aim and how they shoot, and also depending on what sort of weapon they had. Although I did have some of the stuff again happen from the previous patches, where if an enemy is armed with a shotgun, they will just spray that shotgun from far away and somehow those bullets are gonna be hitting you. Their shotgun in this case is a lot stronger than, for example, the shotgun I have as a player, so that's always gonna be a little bit weird. And on top of that, regardless of your difficulty, they also added the Expedition mode. This is relatively a big difficulty increase, because what this means is that if you have the Expedition mode on, the game is only going to save if you are in a safe spot or leaving one of those safe locations. So that means you cannot save as you're exploring out into the zone. For everyone who has been playing Anomaly, they're probably going to recognize this mode from the campfire mode itself, where in that case you were only able to save next to campfires in general. Although keep in mind, if you do leave the game, if you quit the game, it is going to save at your last location, so there isn't going to be a huge issue if maybe you just want to leave at that particular moment and you don't want to run to a safe spot to actually save. This is really interesting in that way, because it makes the game a lot more, how would I say, nerve-wracking, because you have to really pay attention to where you're going and how you're gonna be going against your encounters, because if the enemy's down you, well, you sort of have to go back to your previous save, which can be, a while back. Now, another big thing they were working on are fixes and improvements to the A-Life system. So, as I said, some early forms of faction warfare are happening now, meaning that as I was playing through patch 1.7, I've actively seen different factions engage against each other. Now, usually those factions are going to be if you played previous Stalker games, enemies depending on who it is. So, for example, Duty is always going to shoot at Freedom, Freedom is gonna be shooting at Duty, you're going to have Free Stalkers attacking Bandits, and so on and so on. When it comes to Monolith or everything else, they're pretty much going to be the enemy regardless of which faction it is. Well, there is one faction, but I'm not gonna do any story spoilers in this video. So now, as I'm approaching locations within the game, I've seen that automatically gunfire starts, people are fighting, I go in, and depending on which faction is shooting at which, things are gonna be escalating that way. Now, when it comes to the lore perspective, well, technically Duty and Freedom are in some sort of a, how would I say, peace right now, but I don't know if this is also a bug in this game, but I've actually seen Duty shoot at Freedom, so those things are actually happening. Although one of the issues I had in general when it came to that specific part of A-Life is that once they take a certain location, I've noticed that in two cases, they pretty much disappeared. So I walk 30 meters away from that location, I go back, there is either no one there, or maybe there is a different group all of a sudden just standing there, which wasn't present when I left, and there was no way for them to actually arrive in that location because I was looking at that specific spot this entire time, so I didn't really see them come or leave in that sense. So there are definitely some issues within it, and also I noticed that some of these stalkers started disappearing. So they arrive at the location, the fight is over, he loots the body and just disappears. This has been happening a few times as I was playing through patch 1.7. When it comes to other encounters in the game, specifically with the A-Life system itself, I've noticed more stalkers are gonna be roaming the land, with more mutants all over the place, with honestly much less bloodsuckers than before. I don't know if this was intentional or they are actively like removing the amount of bloodsuckers you actually experience in the game, because it was sort of becoming difficult where you have those issues happen, and every single time you approach a location there's gonna be 1 or 2 bloodsuckers. They're going to be very tanky, and they're a problem because you burn through most of your ammunition and you burn through most of your meds, etc. unless you have a really strong weapon, which you only get like closer, you know, as you're progressing through the game itself. But one of the things which has been repeating from previous patches is that every single time I hear gunshots, there is always going to be a fight between mutants and some stalkers, and usually stalkers are going to win because if they're fighting dogs or they're fighting like lower tier mutants, in most cases they're going to win. Even if they're fighting sometimes like bloodsuckers, they are going to be okay just because of how AI works in general and how precise human AI can be in this game. And this can also sort of relate to the vision that NPCs have, including that specific combat update or well fixes which were happening here. So the vegetation is going to play an active role in, you know, if the enemies are going to see you or not. So if you're standing in the bushes, if you're sort of like navigating around the enemy, especially during the night with night vision on, and if they don't have night vision, they're not going to see you. This makes things a little bit more interesting and, how would I say, more lifelike in that sense, where the AI is going to act more naturally. Now, I still experienced some cases where even though I was far away from the enemy and I was in the bushes behind them, they were sort of like seeing me. So it's not working precisely all the time, regardless if you're standing close to some stalkers or not. So that's one of the things I noticed, but in general there are some changes when it comes to how they see you and how you can sneak around, which is a welcoming update. This sort of can also relate to how enemies approach certain gunfights. So one of the things I noticed is that depending on the weapon they use now, they're going to be properly utilizing it. So if someone has a shotgun, they're not gonna be aiming for you from like far away, but they're actively gonna be trying to flank you, approach you, so they can do full damage. While someone who has a more of an assault rifle, maybe even a sniper rifle, they're going to stay in the back and they're gonna be actively shooting you. Again, it's not working perfectly all the time, so some of the things which they were doing before, like some stupid decisions like going at you or not even hiding, are still happening. But in majority of cases I noticed that change and how smarter they actually play around you, which was a good thing to see. But you know, things are slowly progressing, do not expect anything huge to happen in that sense. They also had a big update for the inventory and equipment stats themselves. So one of the issues that was present before is that each item was not really giving you enough information of what it gives and what it takes. So if you drink, for example, energy drink, your skiff is going to get hungry really quickly. And I was always like thinking like, okay, how much can I drink and how much can I eat? Because it's sort of forcing me every single time I drink an energy drink, skiff is always hungry, which didn't really make a lot of sense. But now those things are changed a little bit in the balancing and it's not going to be the case anymore. Same when it comes to anomalies. You can also see they're in a separate window right now on the side. They're not down here anymore, which is a big plus for me. It makes things a little bit more easier to see, and they're actively going to tell you properly how much you lose and how much you gain by it. So it's not going to be high radiation, maximum radiation, whatever, which doesn't really tell you anything, but you see these bars and it's a lot clearer to read. And this also brings us, I think, to one of the best new fixes they have added in this game, and that's how lumen or how light works here. Now, keep in mind, it's still not perfect. This was probably a little bit of a smaller update in that sense before they continue on to something else, especially when it comes to the full engine upgrade, which they're still working on, so that is still not available and still wasn't a part of any previous patches themselves. For example, if you go into a building right now, what was usually happening is that because of, I guess, lumen, everything outside was really increasing in brightness to the point where it was really, really bright, which doesn't make sense because our eyes don't really work in that way, or at least they don't work in this particular way to that extreme. So now, as you can see, if I'm inside, I can still clearly see what's happening outside. Of course, the brightness is still going to go up a little bit, but I feel like these transitions between the light themselves look a lot better. They look a lot more natural, and it's not really blowing out the outside, and it's not making things easy to see, which is always nice because I honestly did not like how brightness was working before, and it was just awful thing to play with, especially if you're also using night vision and so on. So now the colors, the light, shadows, contrast, and everything as you're playing looks a little bit more natural, little bit more, how would I say, leveled out in balancing. So some of the things are not going to be blown out, the shadows are not going to be too dark in that sense, but they're going to reflect off of each other more naturally and kind of make the game look a little bit more nicer to play. And with this, we can also tie in the performance itself. So one of the things I have noticed in this specific update is that frame rate got a little bit better. Again, keep in mind, this did not magically increase the frame rate for like 20 or 50 or 60, but what I noticed is that specifically in patch 1.7, the areas, especially Stalker hub areas like garbage and so on, feel a little bit more natural in the way of how frame rate works. So one of the biggest hits on your frames were those specific locations, loading in metahumans, loading in everything around you, which is happening in terms of like objects and like big locations. Now those things are now functioning a little better. That means I'm not losing too many frames as I was losing before. And this strange artifacting and some sort of a noise which was happening around the map as you were going out, like for example on buildings you can see that noise, on different objects on the grass you can see that graininess. It's sort of becoming a lot better and just easier to look at. So for me, having these improvements, this specific optimization is, I think, really nice, especially because this is happening before the engine upgrade. Now, I know I don't want to overhype the engine upgrade like it's magically gonna do wonders. We don't know right now what is happening. Like in the history, like some of the games which did the upgrade got more frames, which was always good, but I don't know how well it's gonna work in Stalker. We have to wait for that. But in general, it seems that they have been working a lot around the hood, specifically like below the hood, to make the code better, or well, to make everything rendering a lot easier so you don't lose on those frames, or to have huge oscillations within those frames themselves. And to be honest, I was surprised that even with this I can properly play this game on 3070 Ti. Of course, in some locations the frame rate is still gonna be jumping up and down. Again, some of those locations I don't want to spoil due to story, but again, like for example, Circa was a really problematic one, especially with that graininess. I feel like Circa is now a little bit better on that front. Not great, not terrible. But I think in general, a lot of that has to do with optimizing different parts of the game, like for example, foliage meshes, foliage materials, buildings themselves, because one of the problems is that a lot of buildings in Stalker 2 were flickering a lot, especially those in the background, and you have another problem with the LOD itself, because the level of detail is not really following well in the location you're looking at. That's, I think, one of the reasons why we still don't have binoculars or proper scopes yet. But with this, it feels like they're slowly and surely going towards it, which should be the case maybe with the engine upgrade itself, I don't know. But because optimization was happening and done on those different objects throughout the game itself, it's obviously going to be running better and a lot more smoother in that sense. Again, I haven't gained any frames in particular, but you know, I'm getting less and less stutters than I was actually getting in 1.6, which still got some good things, but 1.7 definitely like really fixes that properly. Also, another plus is that now, as you're looting throughout the zone through different stashes, you're gonna be finding a lot more weapon attachments. I know some people were telling me that they have a problem because they cannot find them. Most of their weapons are naked in that sense, so now actually having like just more attachments throughout the zone is definitely good. And also they have said that they fixed over 90 crashes. To be honest, as I was playing for about 6, 7, 8 hours yesterday, when the patch came out, I did not have a single crash, regardless of who it is, and I was going from like the Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3 and so on to see like, because usually in Stalker 2, like the Act 1 is okay, but the moment you go into Act 2 and some things start happening, that's where most of those problems were happening. But now it seems like right now, without crashes in these 8 hours, but that's again my personal experience. Now for the end, when it comes to main side missions and the open world encounters, they have fixed quite a lot. Now, because of spoilers and because I know a lot of people are still not really back in the game, especially they're not back in like the Act 2 and as I said later on, a lot of these missions are sort of related to it and sort of related to those characters, so I cannot go through them. But again, a lot of those fixes were specifically done for those later stages of the game, which in my opinion are a lot more problematic than some of the issues which are happening, you know, prior to it. Another problem which I still have is that even retesting some of the boss fights in this game, I still feel like some things can be done around it to make it more interesting and more fair, because I'm really not a huge fan of how boss fights were done here, and most of that running around with like AI is still going to happen, so it's still gonna be a little bit confusing and they're still gonna be doing some crazy stuff. So, you know, using meta stuff like throwing grenades or a, you know, rocket launcher is always going to be that thing you can do. So for the end, it seems that patch 1.7 was heavily focused on optimizing some of the features they have added before and started working properly on the A-Life system, because with each and every single update they sort of bring these things closer and closer together to kind of shape the A-Life system we had in previous Stalker games, which wasn't perfect, but it was definitely interesting and something which made Stalker what Stalker was. So do I still see people disappearing in front of me and appearing very close to me? Sadly, yes. It's not happening as constantly as before. I still run into certain like areas where, you know, just all of a sudden mutants are gonna be fighting stalkers even though they were not there. But at least when it comes to their logic, at least when it comes to some of the locations that some NPCs were in, I noticed that it was refreshing properly and I was able to see them on that location. But I mean, there was still some moments where I enter a building, it was empty outside, I've been there for maybe 20 seconds, I go out, all of a sudden a bunch of enemies is standing. They didn't arrive to that location, they just spawned in. So I mean, in general, I think A-Life still needs some work to be functioning properly and to give you that more immersive feeling, but they have been working with that. You know, A-Life goes along with the actual like AI itself that enemies have, so things are improving. So Stalker 2 is shaping along nicely, as I mentioned in my previous video that I did, you know, sort of like encompassing everything that we have went through throughout like this first year, that things have been improving. But if you really want a big change, I would probably wait until they have added the new version of the engine, or probably just wait for 2.0 Stalker, because by then you're going to, well, have a lot more features which you didn't have if you played only during the first few weeks of the game release. Also keep in mind that Stalker 2 is coming out in a few days for PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 5 Pro, so looking forward to that and looking forward to seeing how the game is gonna be performing then. So it was kind of expected that we're gonna be getting an update prior to that release. I mean, at least I was expecting it. So for the time being, I'm pretty sure we're going to get 1 or 2 hotfixes, as we usually do for these updates, and when it comes to anything bigger, I doubt we're gonna be seeing that for at least maybe the end of January, maybe February itself, because again, the holiday season is coming, so that can also sort of like relate in how much work is being done with each, not just with GSC in general, but with most companies. So tell me down below, what do you think about update 1.7? Is it better for you? Is it worse? Let me know down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more. Check us out on Twitter and Discord, and huge thanks to my Patreon supporters. This is LKM signing out, and I will see you guys very soon with a new video. Bye bye.